So this group has been working for our 18-month window, and the last few months, for those of you who are part of the working group, you're like, gosh, they've been really quiet. We've not been quiet. We've been meeting at some crazy early morning hour for me for the last 2 months or so, writing the recommendations. And we're now ready for you, working group members and friends, to take a look and see what you think. So we haven't sent the note out with the link for you, so this will be an overview and some initial thinking on your side. And so my name is Shelley Stahl. I'm with the American Geophysical Union. And our entire, well, I don't want to, you can see from the authors here on the draft recommendation, these are the primary writers, but all of you had feedback into this document. So Deb Agarwal was one of our very first use case owners. She's from the United States. Justin Buck, James Olive, Joan Demereau, Graham Parton, who's online with us, Martina Stockhouse, and Leslie Wyborn. So, and then of course, a host of others. So let's get started. So here's our agenda. We're now welcoming you. We're going to walk you through what a complex citation is, walk you through the 10 recommendations that we have, and there will be a Menti. So if you can do it on your phone if you want to. It'll be for each of the recommendations, how strongly you feel it's important for you. That's feedback for us, because if it looks like everything's strong, then we win. And if it looks like everything's not strong, then we didn't quite do it. And then we're hoping for more feedback from you when we send the recommendation out for your official responses. We'll walk through the different workflow actors and then what those next steps are going to be. So, Martina, would you like to introduce the complex citation, please? And is there anybody who can put the slides up on the screen? I'm going forward, but we can't see them. If I share. Oh man, is it that simple? Stand by. All right. Nope. Yes, there it is. Is it that simple? It is that simple. Check it out, you guys. Okay, hang on. I got to move all of you up out of the way. And here we go. Slideshow. Better. Okay, so pretty picture, all the people. Here's our agenda. Over to Martina.
Even after the years of online meetings, we still have to learn to share. So as an introduction to what problem we try to solve is, so the complex citation is meant to enable that we enable creators and other contributors for data, but also digital objects and physical samples to receive credit. So that is one of our goals. And the second goal, which came during the time of the working group, was the aim to track the continued and growing value of the digital assets. So this has to do with provenance and traceability. And we also are interested to add the funding references to it. So the problem to be solved in really a couple of bullets is we have sometimes citations of subsets of larger data sets. We have sometimes data sets which are recombined from different sources. We have a large number of data sets which should be cited together in a publication. We sometimes have data for graphs or chapters, so that's one of the use cases from the IPCC where we want to get all the traceability, how a figure was created, and assign the credit to all who contributed to it or created some input data. Another problem we want to solve is that we want to enable that knowledge graph can analyze these relationships. traceability is something I have already mentioned, and transparency in the end of how a product was created. Have I missed anything?
Maybe like the fundamental impetus of like 50 citations. And for those of you who this might be new, a complex citation, by the way, hands up for first time hearing. Okay, for you people. So you're trying to publish in a really important journal, and you've got 150 maybe data set citations, and your journal editor says to you, oh no, we can't handle that many, despite the fact that we talk about being as transparent as possible. This was the very first problem we were trying to solve. You know, how can we gather up all the digital objects supporting research, data, software, and everything into a package that could then move through publication more easily, and be fully represent what that research, what the research digital objects were.
Yeah, that goes back to an example from Deb Agarwal, which is the Ameriflux and Fluxnet example. So they had these large number of different data sets which were collected across different sites in the North and South America. And in the end, it wasn't possible to cite all the data sets in the publication. And they considered several workarounds. And in the end, I think they published a paper on it. And they lost a lot of the original data creators by this solution, because the authorship was just limited to the principal investigators, and all, usually the younger scientists didn't get the credit for their contribution. The second example in the middle is mine, so I can speak a bit more to that. So in the IPCC, we also have the problem that we have very many data sets which are analyzed and used to create results which are shown in the figures. These data sets are not directly citable, but only in these collections. So we have model data, we cite it for all data created in a model run, which makes sense if you analyze where the data was used and analyze the impact. So we had this problem to assign credit on these large collections, but also specify which data sets were used to enable the traceability. So that's what our use case was, and our aim is to put this complex citation in a figure caption to enable the access to the traceability information as well as the credit for the input data providers. The third example is from our colleagues from the BODC, from the British Oceanographic Data Centre. They have very diverse data sets, and which are collected through their ship cruises. So a very diverse kind of data set. They organize their data in different ways. So they really have this problem of recombined data sets similar to the IPCC use case. Unfortunately, we don't have one of the two speakers here which provided it. They could provide more detail on it. And with these three use cases, we thought we cover most of what we collected from the other use cases. So these were our guiding use cases for the start. And then we analyzed the workflow actors, so everyone we need to make that happen.
So I'll admit that we are hitting on the work of the working group at a pretty high level. So just wanting to make sure that you're aware that those three initial pilot use cases, within the recommendation, there's a table where we gathered all of the other use cases that we've identified, and we mapped all of their needs into the three original pilot use cases, and we have complete coverage so far. So there's multidiscipline use cases from across our broad community. This solution is meant to be a one-size-fits-all. How does that translate in Spanish? I'm not really sure. Do we have that, one-size-fits-all? Yep, we do. Okay, yeah. We have that. Excellent. So if you're finding that this isn't working for you, like you need it, but what we're talking about isn't working, we want to talk to you because the number of workflow adopters, so I'm not using the word stakeholder on purpose. We were learning from our indigenous friends that stakeholder is not a good word for them, so we're trying to move away from that. So workflow actors, we only want one solution so that the volume of workflow actors that need to implement one solution. So I implore you, if this is useful, but it's not going to work for you, come see us. Let us walk through your use case with you so that we understand the challenge. And for instance, when we were working with the folks from Physical Samples, we did have a misalignment that was problematic. But once we talked it through, we could see the solution rather readily. And it will work, in fact, for IGSNs and RRIDs and all of the different persistent identifiers for physical samples. So bringing you to this particular graphic in front of you, we reoriented it based on the kind of both the different types of workflow actors. You will be familiar with the first two really well. The first one is I've created a data set, or I've created a software or some digital object, and I do the right thing, and I preserve it in an appropriate repository where I get a persistent identifier. And let's say it's a DOI. And then I go to write my paper, and I put it into that particular digital object along with the other 100. I now need to gather them all together because I've learned about this project. I'm going to follow the process that we have here, and I'm going to create a complex citation object. Doesn't that sound cool? Complex citation object. It's a new vocabulary. We tried all of the other words, and they didn't go. And if you were part of our early work, we had a funny title for this called reliquary. I'm going to look up and see how that translates in Spanish. Reliquary, like in Catholic reliquary? Yeah. Okay, you got it. All right. That, it's a little offensive. It's a tiny bit offensive. But if you take the humorous side of it, it's a box of precious things, a reliquary. So our complex citation object is a box of precious things, right? These are all the data, the software that goes into your research. So in creating that a complex citation object is essentially an index. It's an index of all of the things that you want to cite that a publisher is going to have difficulty implementing because they already have challenges with data citations. I mean, they can do it, but it's hard for some are better than others. So then in your paper, you cite that complex citation object in the reference section. It itself, we're expecting the citation will be a DOI citation such that there's a landing page and that entity will persist. And then the journal, so we're coming down to the third line now. The journal, they are open arms. They say, thank you so much for this beautiful, complex citation object. We honor it in our references. We know what to do with it, hopefully. And they include that in the metadata associated with the paper. And what that means is they have they are one of the members of Crossref being a registration agency. So all journals in the world use Crossref except for Asian language journals. I think that's, if you're from DataCite and you know better than I do, I'm summarizing that heavily, but there's a registration agency, 2 in China, 1 in Japan, 1 in Korea, that handle languages, Asian languages, in order to make them more meaningful. When the research is in that language, Crossref takes everybody else. So they register the publication, because that's just like you register a data set. Journals do the same thing. They register the publication, they get a DOI for the publication, they assign that, and they, of course, then publish that paper. But what happens, what Crossref will do is event data, which is they're partnered with DataCite on. Event data picks up the data citations and actually generates that linkage that we want journals to do with data citations or software or the other digital objects, and assert that relationship, right? That's the thing that we're all working towards. Please, journals, please do a good job. That's your job, please do it. They're getting there, they're slow. Then, separately from that linkage, we have our scholarly indexer friends. So let's pick on the Web of Science, because they're actually part of our team, and they have been incredibly helpful. And I don't know if the NIH folks are here, but the PubMed folks has also been really helpful. So thank you for your team at PubMed. They'll index, and index is a little bit of a kind of a black box. What it means is they're acknowledging the citation not of the complex citation object. You unzip it. The object doesn't get value. The object doesn't have value. The directionals, the links to each of the linked items is the value. And in our conversation with the indexers, they understand that this is just a package being delivered to them, and they need to then link the paper to each of the members within this complex citation object. Okay, that's an important concept to have in your head. I'm going to let it sit there for a second. So it's like a package of all of the digital objects that went into the research, or for the IPCC report, the figure, some scholarly entity, such that you get transparency, provenance, and the ability to have attribution to the creators of those objects. Things that are very hard to do today reliably. Okay, so we have two vocabulary words. I think they're on the next slide, aren't they? Vocabulary words? Yeah, they are. Okay. All right. So we treat the DOI agency work separately from the indexer work. They use the same information, but they use it in different ways. So the linkages, and if you see the box with, like, let's see, linked digital objects are related from to author's publication and makes it machine actionable, that's where event data comes in, feeding into Scholix. And then the scholarly indexers are acknowledging that the citation was there, and they feed into institutions that are looking for all the ways that we measure the work of research. Okay, I'm going to pause a second. All right. Feeling it? I mean, does that make sense to you all?
Shelley, we have two questions online.
Two questions online. Can you help me with it?
Yeah. The first one is complex citation object a PID?
Ooh, is complex citation object a PID? That's the intention. The intention is it will be a new type of PID, but there's a lot of similarity to, say, a collection. A collection, it has value in and of itself. So the people who create the collection have curated that collection, and we know that DataCite has a DOI collection. And the way we're looking at this is a little different. It is a collection, but we want to skip, we don't want to acknowledge the administrative low-level work of just collecting it all together. We want the credit to go to each of the objects. So that's why we're calling it something different. How it will be implemented, we still have to have conversations with the workflow actors. And I know there's other hands here, but we have the other question online.
Yeah, so in the end, the answer is, it is a persistent identifier, but the interpretation is different.
That's right. The interpretation will be different. In the recommendation, we do go into the details on how it is different. And we walk through all of the different existing labels that have been used and why they were discarded.
And the second question is more related to the workflow and the actors. Who issues the complex citation object?
We haven't weighed in on that yet. So in our minds, it could be a particular repository. We know Pangea has the ability to do this for collections, for instance. But we also know that researchers use data from multiple repositories. So we are looking for adopters to help us build in the next round of this working group. When we move into maintenance mode and implementation, we're looking for adopters to help create this. We've done some initial work on that and can share that in our next meetings, but we haven't ever done it live anywhere. So it could be a single repository, but that would, unless that repository allowed linkages from other repositories, that would be too limiting. We would really want an entity that could accept the linked digital objects, the children of the complex citation object from anywhere. Those are good questions. We're going to walk into the recommendations. Why don't, is it a good, do you want to listen to the recommendations and then ask more questions?
Well, there have been questions online, so I thought
Martina just asked them.
I know.
Why didn't we do the room? Okay, yeah. Who has questions right now? Okay, 2. Let's take those 2, and then we'll go on to the recommendations. Okay.
Well, I actually have 2 questions. One is why do you speak about this complex citation object as a separate PID? Because you can use the DOI system to cope with it. You could go to DataCite, because it's likely a DataCite object because it relates to data, and ask them to include a new resource type general, which is called complex citation object. And then every repository, and not only Pangea, but every other who's willing to do so, and there's no limit for accepting objects that are beyond, that's just like a citation. You can just combine these things, but with a resource type general complex citation objects, everyone knows that it's not a collection, but it's something to unwrap. And the second question is that...
Hold on, let's answer the first. So absolutely yes. These are the recommendations. Think of them as a requirements package. We didn't want to go to DataCite. Actually, we have talked to DataCite. We've talked to Helena, we've talked to Matt. They said, well, exactly what is it you want to do? And that's what this document is. So you're perfectly on time to join the group for implementation.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
The second question is about your idea to contact the indexers, which come after the publication. Because you know that I'm always spreading the word on this complex citation working group in the geodesy community, and they're really keen on using it because they have exactly the same issue. I was always have had the impression that we can start already with the journals, because on one hand you can cite the complex citation object in the reference list of the PDF version of the paper, but then you also have the machine-readable metadata and crossref standards, where today good journals are also putting all the reference lists in there. Mm-hmm. And if they had a tool to unpack this object, they could already provide the world with the information and not only the indexers, because then Web of Science is doing something else than the others. So I thought this would be a more logical solution. Possibly.
So that's another possible way of implementing, and we can certainly have that conversation. The unpacking that you're talking about, the question is, when does that happen, and how many different entities are part of that group that have to implement in order for it to work for any journal?
Well, I think it's if we developed, and that's also could be an outcome of a working group, like a little software tool that is then used by the major publishing houses, similar to Scholix. This
Yeah,
could be,
Also,
yeah.
maybe I can also
Yeah.
quickly comment. I think you are one step ahead of us.
Yeah.
So what we try to do in this first phase of the working group is really bringing the concept together and making the implementation into a follow-up working group. So research tribe general for data site metadata is one piece, and how to implement it with the indexes is another piece. We are aware that there's a lot of work ahead and that we have to include much more not stakeholders, but workflow actors
You people.
in that process.
But you cannot say it's a separate PID, because this would require a separate PID registration service. And therefore, it is not ahead, but it's something to consider at the very early stage. That's what I'm...
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
To add to that, I fully agree. Talking to the citation counters, how many citations, so actually, in my opinion, it would be good you have that object which is in the PDF, so you have a short citation which refers to that reliquary object, but in the metadata which is available at Crossref for the journal, in my opinion, there should be the fully expanded list in Crossref. So, and based on that, my idea would be when somebody like a journal publisher registers a DOI at Crossref and puts that reliquary in the citation list, Crossref would be able to expand that automatically, and then you would have solved the problem.
Potentially.
Somehow.
Yes,
Yeah.
potentially. But we have one more question, and then I'm going to go into the recommendations, and this will hopefully get everybody else. These are folks that have been participating on the Complex Citation Working Group, and we'll be able to pull you all up into the same space. Go ahead.
Hi, just a quick note. I wanted to mention the RAID, the Research Activity Identifier, coming out of ARDC in Australia, because that, for me, we're doing related work, and that feels like a much better fit than perhaps DataCite, or maybe a combination of both. But yeah, just thought I'd mention the RAID.
Yeah, thank you. We do see RAID as an element within the citation object so that all could be connected. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. Okay, let's get you all into the same place with the recommendations. So back to those two new vocabulary words. So we talked about complex citation object, and we see that it's likely going to need to be a digital object identifier. And that's a discussion as to why that is selected. The current technology today, that's the one that makes the most sense. And then the children within the object, those things that are being indexed, we're using the term linked digital object, and I want to highlight for you the fact that we are very aware that linked data object is very similar. We don't want you to put the two concepts together. They're similar, but think about this one separately, linked digital object. A linked digital object is a citation. The metadata is a citation as you would put it into a paper. So we don't go into a lot of detail on what that is because the community has good guidance there. We go into detail on the complex citation object and our recommendations on that. Oh, and we do, if you want to grab that Google link, you can grab the draft citations. So get your Mentimeter going. It might say that I haven't started the presentation yet. So don't let that bother you. So so for those of you who hop straight on to menti.com, the code is 3605-3622. And if you need it again, just let us know. I'll give you a second. Does anybody need any more time? Yes, okay. Yes, okay, yep, no worries. No worries. So you all have your thinking caps on. Some of us have bigger caps than others, depending if you're jet lagged or not. Okay, are we ready to go forward? Yes, okay, all right. Okay, there's 10 altogether. So when I finish walking through these four, I'm gonna engage the Mentimeter. I don't know if I can do it at the same time. Maybe I can try. Okay, anyway, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. So number one, each complex citation object must capture a sufficient level of granularity to ensure that the credit and provenance to the specific cited material, that would be the linked digital object, is included. So for instance, logically, a DOI would be important, and perhaps some other metadata elements that are logical to a citation. So it's a real fundamental item. Number 2, each complex citation object must enable the mechanism of automated attribution and credit for each of the individual objects that are referenced. Meaning, the entire point here is that we're including all digital objects, and the creators of those objects get attribution, and hopefully that allows the folks that have the potential of giving credit to those individuals, they have access to that information. I'm very cautious on using the word credit, because credit is a construct. We can't make someone get credit just because their data was cited, but we can enable it. We can make sure the attribution is there, and then the folks that are looking for commonly used data sets or citations for data sets, like an institution or other entity, then has access to that information easily. So I'm careful to say attribution or enabling credit. We can't make credit happen. Number 3, each complex citation object must be a clearly demarcated object that is not a primary output and should not accrue credit itself. It's an administrative tool. The collection itself is not a scientific part. It's solving an administrative problem. It's not necessarily itself adding value, it's just collecting everything together in a package such that all of the digital objects get value. So it's just a package to go from here to there, and it should not get credit itself. And number 4, and then we'll pause. Each complex citation object must be identifiable, referenceable, remain stable, and resolvable through use of a suitable PID mechanism. We're talking about digital object identifiers, likely. As such, they may not be deleted, right? Persistent. And the reference to the linked digital objects of a complex citation object cannot be changed. Any reference update to the content will require a version change. So common DOI guidance. Okay. All right, so those of you who have your Menti ready to go, let's see if I can be smart. Okay, here we are. Present. Super. Okay, here you go. 1, 2, 3, 4, where on the left is disagree and on the right is agree. And yes? Menti number again. I
have it here. So
I wish it were on the top.
It's 3605, 3622.
3605, 3622. Yes, yes. Okay, one person, real quick, loves this. Thanks, whoever you are. Good job. 2 people coming in. Interesting, it's the credit for itself. Yep, we had a lot of conversation on that as well. It makes sense that that's of.
Especially if you think of nuance, because they have authors, I think, so it's something that
Yep,
you guys care.
yep. Yep. Good, okay. All right, a little bit more time. 10 of you, ooh, nice, how many of you are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, like 20 or so. Okay, give you a little bit more time. Online too, please, if you can manage it. All right, cool. Okay, what I don't know is if I hop out of presentation mode here and back over to the presentation, what happens to Menti? Don't hang up on it. Look. Next ones?
citations?
Oh, you know what? I can do it here. Yeah, I can do, hang on, I can do it here. Let's see. Because they're copied here. Okay, yeah, that worked. Thanks. That's so smart. Cut and paste. All right, here are the next four. And you can also weigh in on the next four. I don't know why. Thank you, Martina. So complex citation object, which we've now squished up to CCO. We've moved from must to should. I'm going to call that out. We moved from using the word must to using the word should. The complex citation object should employ a suitable versioning mechanism to support supersedence, so versioning work. Such that, let's say you're the reviewer of your paper recommended you go get more data. You've already created your complex citation object. You go get more data. You then cite it in your complex citation object, and now you're updating your references for version 2, right? Complex citation object should adhere to a standardized structure, agnostic if any particular provider, utilizing linked data, good PID work. The complex citation object, this is number 7, should primarily support the use of PIDs, but also permit non-PID items. So we recognize that not everyone is able to use a PID, that different disciplines are in different places, that you might have a URL for something and you still want to include it in order for you to have transparency. Credit won't work very well if you just have a URL. And for those PIDs that are not fully implemented within, let's say, Scholix or the event data, you can still include them because when the implementation eventually happens, which we're all hoping on, then you can go back to you can go create the links in arrears and fix prior publications. I'm a big fan of that, by the way. And number 8, that your complex citation object should be sufficiently flexible to allow easy adoption. So anybody out there who is, this is good, but not quite, we need you to be on board with 8 and resolve any challenges. Okay, so there's 14 of you. That seems good. Thank you all. 15. I'll give you all a second. 16. Oh, you guys are great. Great, and I love that you're mostly supporting this. I mean, you're all on the right, so lovely, okay. And then the last 2, where 9 has a subcomponent, complex citation object should be provided such that its metadata and content are always as open, as accessible as possible or reasonable, because just like it's metadata, so as we always say, metadata should always be open, so that follows fair practices. And then the corollary for 9 there, 9.1, that the complex citation object license applies only to itself and does not transfer or change anything within the linked digital object. One does not impact the other. One is only, the license for the object is just for the object. That was a lengthy conversation to get that in our heads. So, and then our 10 complex citation object should have sufficient provenance metadata for its creation. Great. Okay. Ooh, we hit 17 really fast. Nice. Thank you. Okay. And then I do have for you, and we'll give you just a moment, as things are running through your mind, even if they're not fully formed thoughts, if you could take a moment and say, I'm wondering about this, I'm wondering about that, I have a concern about this. The paper is over 40 pages. Hopefully, the answer is in there, but while it's on your mind, if you could capture it here, because I don't want you to forget it, give you all a moment. It's optional. You don't have to do this. You could say something like, this is the best presentation ever. That would be okay as well. The Spanish translation is just singing to my heart. You could say that, because there's a man working really hard back there trying to say everything I'm saying. Great work. Okay, thanks. Oh, yeah, good. API, nice. Yeah, I don't think we have in there anything on that. We could put that as a, identify that as something to build out. Good, good. Okay, give you all a little bit more time. Yep. Oh, there we are. Okay. Who assigns the citation? How will the links work? Wondering about trust and reuse, nefarious stuff. Yes, those nefarious people. Whew, gotta watch them. Should also make clear metadata needs to be available. Also, while the roles have roles. The person also while a role, oh, which, it's probably which role have, okay, all right, yeah, that's okay, we'll figure it out. Great. Content genuine, continue. Yeah. I do believe a collection is a genuine contribution to research. So that will be an important conversation to have for clarity when we start getting into the details with DataCite or whomever the right partners are. I think it's DataCite, but I don't want to assume just yet. Yep, great. Whoever said brilliant work, thanks. There's a lot of people that did a lot of work. Okay, all right, let me maybe give you all seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, okay. Thank you, everyone. Let me hop back over to the presentation. And
There were a couple of comments or questions in these.
sure, yeah, yep.
No, in these.
Oh, do you want to answer them?
At least say something to the.
We can come back to them. If you want to finish the presentation, then we can come back to the comments. Yeah. Good, all right. Were you doing this slide? What's next? No, should I keep going? I think you should do this slide. Martina, I'd like to invite you back to the podium to do this next slide.
So we are a bit jumping back. Is there a question for understanding or?
Are we done with Menti now, or we should come back? I don't want to lose the.
I think we are done with Menti.
We're done with Menti. Thank you, Lou.
So we are now jumping back to our draft recommendations and our pilot studies. So in the end of the formulation of our recommendations, we just look back if we can reach our expectations. So we have introduced which problems we want to solve, and then we compared our approach if it's really solving the problem that we have lined out at the start. So the first requirement was these citing subsets of larger data sets. So we think, yes, with this approach, we can cover it. So if there are large lists of linked objects from subsets of larger data sets, so we can put them into this complex citation object and make clear that if their citation level is different, we can include that as well. Underpinning data for graphs or chapters. So it is the approach is agnostic to the product, the data product we have. So if it's a graph, then we can identify the data which was used in it. Enabling credit. So that was what we started off with, that this is one of the most important parts. And the work we have to do is really in the implementation to make sure that the credit is assigned to the right group of people. So to these providers or creators and contributors of the linked digital objects. So if it's fully implemented, we can reach that requirement. The next one, larger groups of data sets. Well, certainly yes, so there's no limit in the number of the linked data objects, it's just small references. Compression of knowledge graph levels, I think I struggle usually a bit with that one.
Citing a complex citation object within a complex citation object.
So if we have these different levels and
Essentially, the
the
linked
nested one, or
yeah, you don't want to nest a complex citation object within a complex citation object. This was a request from the indexers. They wanted to keep it as two levels, the object and the linked digital objects, instead of like a recursive. It's more of a implementation to make sure that we don't allow a linked digital object to be a complex citation object.
so it means to compress to one level of complexity if we unzip, like you like to call it, the complex citation object. User-based Bayesian academia. Again, the approach is independent of the application we use it for. Traceability. So yes, this was something coming from our side, from the IPCC side, to trace a data product back to all the different input data provided, to the software provided and how they are combined. So it's a real flexible approach. We could include linked digital objects to the real full information of the provenance if we want to do that. Now here's the knowledge graph to be limited to 2 levels. I think that's what we have discussed already, and it's not the final approach. So it would be nice, and there's technically for knowledge graphs no limit to have these nested objects. It's just really the step we want to do to enable an easier uptake of our recommendations. So that's why we haven't put the yes here, but say, well, that's a compromise we do to get it implemented in the near future as first step. Yeah.
Okay. I can try to bring up those other questions.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to try to bring up your Menti questions and see if I can see those. Results. So no results yet. Oh yeah, there is. There you are. Okay. So going back and forth across here. So the API access. Maybe I can make this a little bigger for you all to see. There we go. So that's a little bit, yeah, okay. API access covered in these requirements. That's worthy, yeah, to be as machine actionable as possible. So the API, so definitely moving into implementation, that makes a lot of sense. So acknowledging the person who said that, thank you. We need to define a basic metadata for complex citation objects. Yes, what you'll see in the recommendation is what we called our cocktail napkin recommendation. And so we actually started notionally working on that, but we will definitely need to bring that to every single one of the use cases identified, not just those 3 pilots, but everybody else. Make sure that those basic elements will work. So I completely agree that coming into implementation, that will need to be identified. Interestingly, I think there was another note here, but for all of the other workflow actors, the intention is that we would have some sort of guidance for each of them, that, you know, from their point of view, this is what they would receive, and then this is what they would be responsible for making sure to happen. So we would help them realize that in partnership with them. We're not going to do this and just send it over to all the indexers and say, good luck. We are inviting them to come. And what we're learning, well, this was interesting for me. I had not realized how many niche indexers there are out there. So we are trying to hit the larger indexers, and if they are implementing which we're hopeful for. They're coming to our meetings, but they haven't promised anything, but they're still coming to our meetings, that will be able to then influence the more niche indexers. So who assigns this? Who assigns the citation, and how will this link with other PIDs, DOIs and PIDs? Who assigns the citation? So the generator of the complex citation object will need to be, and let's assume it's a DataCite DOI. Let's assume that they'll need to be a member of DataCite as a consumer of those DOIs, and they will be beholden to the requirements of a DOI, so a landing page and all of the information that describes the complex citation object, however we decide that to be. And that's what will happen, is you'll create the object, the DOI will be there, and then the citation of a complex citation object will follow citation guidance. But you have a good point, no one's ever cited a complex citation object, so what would that look like? And perhaps what you're saying, we should provide that guidance as well. And then the linkages will follow DataCite linkage guidance. Martina, I'm not an expert, is related to and is supplement of.
Yeah,
And
the relation.
the relation between the complex citation object and the linked digital objects will follow the current guidance.
Yeah, I think that's also answering the question what metadata structure we have in mind. So I think the base will be the DataCite metadata, because we expect that those who register these complex citation objects will be members of DataCite, and we have a good relationship to DataCite. So I think that would be our natural partner, and we need to discuss a bit of metadata changes. That was something which was mentioned earlier in the discussion. And early implementers, I think we will search for them in the follow-up working group to really approach them and work together with them. So anyone who is interested to join us for the implementation phase is very welcome. The first ideas, I think, was that we have one pilot that is our IPCC use case, where we use Zenodo and we see where the gaps are. So we could really reach out to them and ask them, could you change the things we need or make a few changes to support the complex citation objects? So one thing we came around was we have no file upload in the end. We only have these linked objects, so that was one thing, and the resource type, because you can't interpret it. So there were a couple of things during that pilot phase which came up, but it's not a real technical problem, I would say, what we are talking. It's more the community change which will be the challenge. Yep. Uwe, do you have a comment?
Okay, let's
Okay.
keep going. Wondering about trust and reuse for nefarious reasons, and are there any ways to build trust? Trust for complex citation objects, that makes perfect sense. And the trust then comes in with the digital objects themselves and the repositories hosting those digital objects. So when you're collecting them all together, you're a researcher, you've used a whole bunch of data sets, a whole bunch of, at the proper granularity, and there's raw data and aggregated data and all of the things that go into really complex research. We're citing from a preservation repository something that has should already be compliant with the trust principles, or we would like to think that's true. And so the index of what's being included is the researcher saying this is what's been included, and then the question would go to how do we validate that everything is there? So that's a really good point. So yeah, I would agree. We would need to make sure that there's expectations on that. You should make also clear which metadata needs to be available, while also, and which role Okay. Okay. Sorry. Uwe is fine, everyone. Okay, let me scoot on to the next one. What metadata structure do you have in mind? Please join the working group. Let's do that. Are there cases where the curation collection of objects in a complex citation object would constitute a genuine contribution to research? Please help us navigate that. This is a fine line between a collection that's curated, the works of Shakespeare, and this is all of the things I use within my research, and my point of gathering them is because I'm having a hard time working with my journal to get 1,000 citations in, right? So this is where our balance was. We didn't want to. So one of the anecdotal conversations I've had with, in this case, it was the European Commission. The first conversation I had with them on data citation was, you realize the way we see this is if you cite 100 data sets, you're impacting, you are bloating your H index, and we see that as being nefarious as a researcher. And I said, whoa, 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 whoa. That is not true. The H index does not include that in the calculation, and do you realize the H index is not transparent? If you don't have the citations to the data, you don't have transparency on the research. So part of thinking through the attribution of a complex citation object is remembering our funders are looking for us to try to be, for areas where we are trying ourselves to be nefarious. And by saying, no, it doesn't get credit, we are saying, this is not adding to the scientific record. This is just an administrative act that we're doing here. We are just gathering everything together. We are not, by itself, this is not any more than connecting it to the research. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to make a short comment on these remark. You should make also clear which metadata needs to be available, rules about authors and contributors. So the most important metadata is that of the linked digital objects, because we want to assign the credit there. So we are aware that there is a precondition that these linked digital objects are annotated with sufficient metadata so that the credit can be assigned, but it's a bit out of the hands of the complex citation object itself.
OJS, help me with OJS. Open Journal something? No, okay. Anybody know what an OJS is? Okay. You're out yourself, sorry. Oh, back in the back. Can we get that person
Open Journal System.
Oh, thanks, Amy. Was that Amy's voice? Yes. Okay, Open Journal System. Yeah. So not sure who that was who did the comment, but please let me know what you're thinking, and we can certainly try to figure it out. But yes, these sorts of things should be available in a machine actionable way for the community who's observing and using scholarly communication. So in general, I think the answer is yes. If complex citation objects were DOIs, we would have to, yes.
May I just add the comments here?
Yep.
There was a comment regarding the S index from Vashu. So he or she writes that the S index is coming for data sets, and the complex citation object should be considered in the S index.
Is that the NIH challenge? That's, yes?
Yes. They are initiating this.
Yeah. There's a very nice challenge by NIH where the S index, I believe, is the sharing index. So encouraging researchers to share, but it's in development using this challenge that NIH is supporting. And it looks like my Zoom died. So for those of you online, I'm really sorry.
There were two comments from Graham in the chat. I don't know if we can allow him to speak, if he's still there. No, your Zoom died, so maybe we are not online anymore. We lost the virtual participants if your connection closed down.
Hang on, let me hop back in.
We are still online, is here in the chat, so I don't know, maybe only your sharing is collapsed. I don't know
If Graham can speak,
Yeah.
if you can allow that, that would be fantastic.
I don't know if you can hear me or
We
not.
can't hear you in the room. Try again.
Shall I try again? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Just about. Yeah, so I just put in 2 comments. One was about, was responding to, do we,
Hang on, Graham, you're not coming through the room very well. You sound muffled. Can the online people, the volume for the online people come up? People are looking feverishly at the technology back there.
Shall I try again? How's that?
I can hear you, but it sounds like you're coming from outside the room. It's kind of weird.
I am. I'm in the UK.
We're looking to the back, to the technical people should.
Martina, why didn't you read out? Is it working? No, don't. Oh, we can't hear you now.
Coming through here in the room. So I
Is that
start.
working now?
You're getting a bit louder.
Okay, I'll try.
Try again, Graham.
I was saying that, one of the key aspects of these complex citation objects is they're recognized in the knowledge graph as a pass-through object. So it's kind of like the key thing is that anything that touches on them doesn't stop there. It kind of goes to what's within them to make sure that we have the recognition is actually kind of given to what they're connected to. Now, whether or not they have the necessary metadata, and people, the indexes kind of stop on them and consume that metadata in itself. But the key thing is we're trying to signpost to what's beneath them, what's contained, what's linked. And I think that's the key thing, which you mentioned earlier, Shelley, about how it's different to the collection object.
Yes.
And the other one was, it was about how, what is the structure and how we actually make use of them now. And I think the issue is that we actually could start citing these things, but the problem is that because we don't have an agreed structure and how these complex citation objects are put together, if you did that, they'd be just dead ends at the moment. So the key thing is to actually kind of have that structure in place so you know how to then actually consume them subsequently.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Graham. So the comment, I realize I'm not on Zoom, but I can still see the Menti. Complex citation objects if they were DOIs, we would have to provide the mandatory DOI metadata. So yes, that's the intent. We didn't want to be too prescriptive in our recommendations, so you'll see the recommendation hedging a little bit. But we would want to use that existing schema to in alignment. So that does make sense. There's a recommendation to instead call it a complex citation identifier object. That's nice. That's nice. We'll consider that. Yeah, because it's more clear on what it is. It's not itself a thing, it's an identifier. So that's interesting. Thank you for that. Somebody from Costa Rica is seeing this as valuable and wants to contribute as well. Please, yes, you can join the working group, the RDA working group, and you'll get the emails and can jump in on the working group meeting. So yes, please. And provide use cases. Yeah, if you've got any additional use cases. So yes, please. Thank you, Martina. And then have you considered the ways this relates to reproducibility? A complex citation object seems to be a good entry point to access the data sources of a paper you want to reproduce. Yes, it should support reproducibility. It has the potential of including absolutely everything you used. So yes,
That was also the motivation for our IPCC use case. That was what IPCC was asking for. It was the reproducibility of the figure, starting with the input data, so not with the input to the climate models, but with the data which was used by the authors. So yes.
I don't have Zoom. All right.
Do we want to speak about the next steps? I think we have 90 minutes left.
In Zenodo, the recommendation is there as a PDF, and you're welcome to grab it. Trying to see if anybody's found it yet. No, not yet. And from there, we'll take any additional recommendations you have to fine-tune it before it goes out for all of RDA to take a look at as a formal recommendation. So we'll do that over the next 2 weeks and submit by the end of November, which is when we told the tab we would have it in.
Just a comment, so the link to the Zenodo is on the slide and in the collaborative notes. So if you have seen that.
Okay, and we'll send it out to the working group also. If you haven't yet joined, now's a good time, and then you'll get the email later on today with the link. Is there any other questions online or in the room? Your exuberance is washing over me. Thank you. After lunch. Thanks for staying awake.
We have another question or 2 questions. The first is, how many contributors are there in a typical complex citation object?
So most journals are comfortable with 1, 2, 3, 10 data citations. Realize that most journals, this is new. Getting them correct is new. For my scientific journals, there's 24. We've worked very hard from going from 1% of our papers having data citations, or small number, to 90%. This year, 2024, we have 90%. We put an enormous amount of effort to make that happen, and we have a small number of journals. So think about Taylor and Francis and Wiley and other societies that don't have those resources. So they'll usually push back when you hit more than 20, 30, 40, definitely not 100, and they'll push you into the supplementary information. So the way we're viewing a complex citation object is a way to alleviate that pushback, so that you always have indexing, you can be as detailed as you need to be. There is no minimal or maximal. Oh, that's interesting. Does anybody know if DataCite has a maximum? We'll find out. We definitely 2,000 are possible?
Yeah, and
Okay.
the CERN has a very long list of creators for their data sets. The number of creators is really long, and related objects is also can go in the hundreds, so I haven't reached the limit.
So it's great to have a completely, just one second, a completely different way to say what the max is.
Yeah, but Shelley, if we follow your third recommendation that the complex citation object is not a citable object per se, we don't need to address the contributors, because each of the objects that is cited has their own contributors because they are signed with DOIs and everything. So the object itself, if we really follow the idea that this shall not be cited except for the journal and for providing this back, we don't need to discuss the contributors at all.
Yes, but I think the problem turns around to how many related links there can be. How many relationships? Yeah.
I have actually added more than 2,000 related reference identifier in metadata, and they're all submitted to DataCite. That's fine. I think there is no limit.
Yeah, we asked this question.
Go on. I wanted to summarize your discussion in the chat, so Graham, please go on.
Yeah, so we explored this aspect when we were looking at the Zenodo pilots about how many linked objects you could add in, and because Zenodo said they're using DataCite metadata schema, there was no limit. So we didn't see any limit ourselves, even though we had a very large range of numbers of linked data objects in the related work section. The other question about, I think, is do you take all the contributors' names from all the linked objects? Yeah, that's something which I think we did discuss at one point, but I think we decided that it'd be very difficult to do. It was how would you get permission from all of those people to include their names? And so if you don't do that, because you are just pointing to the objects which then accrue the credit and they have their own citations, then there's nothing to worry about there.
Yes, hello. So my name is Svein Gundersen. I'm from Elixir, Norway. Two questions. The first question is about the size of citations here, because it seems like a use case typical use case that it might be used for is for AI. If you create a model that takes data from a large number, millions of data sources, would this solution scale to support that? Yeah, take that first, I guess.
I'm all for that. Yeah, I think it should scale. I think we should get our structures in place and then tell our AI friends this is how they do it. Yeah, I think absolutely, because it could be unlimited number of linkages. Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that very much.
Yeah, I also love that use case. So we should have it in our next step.
Yeah, I'm not doing that myself, but I would also assume that there might be some things appearing for those users that you might not have thought about. Another question I have is, because there's, I don't know if you're aware of this project called the RO Crate project, which seems to be a way that people can possibly submit these complex citations. Because they're basically a way to submit data in a collection, and that includes process citations. So this seems to be an adopter, but yeah.
Yeah, Carol Goebel and Stian were part of some of our original work. So I think they're just waiting for us to figure it out, and then they'll hop back in. So Carol, if you're listening, thanks. And Stian, thanks. Yes. RO Crate, yes. And one of the original questions was, couldn't we just call it a crate? I'm like, I don't know. I think Carol will be a little upset. Let's not do that to her. Question in the back. The back is really far away. Walking back.
So in a bit of an imagination, and I don't want to, not that you had to have thought about this, but what do you envisage as the credit taxonomy and how this might affect credit?
I think it would bring that question to a whole new level. For those of you who are familiar with ESIP, the Earth Science Information Partners, they had a working group take a look at credit in light of just data, because credit has data as a thing, but there's different roles, right? There's different roles. And so they dissected all of that. And so then the question will be, I mean, I could imagine that, what was the role of this data? Yes, that's right. So let's turn it around. So the preservation repository who received the data set should implement who the contributors are, the contributors and what they did. We're looking to them to have that information. We're not going to be able to provide it.
So then it perhaps would be possible from a machine readable to create the credit, at least of the data or of within your object, right? To create that credit, not the entire credit taxonomy, linked to it of the people.
Yeah, I like that, and I think we should probably pull out more strongly the responsibility. I mean, first of all, for those of you who represent repositories in this room, I realize your burden is heavy and your funding is light. So I don't mean to cause more burden, but maybe by saying it out loud, we can help our funders realize that if there was a requirement to identify what those contributions were for the data as its own research product, everything from the person who actually, created the instrument to the person who, down to curation, then that would be a really clear understanding of the amount of work that went into that particular research product that we cannot see today. So we really can't see it. So that is a great question. All right. Okay. Walking back to the front.
We have, I think it looks like Leslie putting a question into the notes. What do you envision as credit taxonomy and how it might impact credit, the taxonomy?
I wonder if she was just capturing what was being said, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Leslie, knowing that there's no way I'm typing. Okay, great. Any other questions? Yes. Bob Downs, coming over to you. He's towards the front, thanks so much.
So I'm just thinking about how these are going to be used. And so if say they're just going to be used for data.
Any digital object.
But say they just get used for data because there are too many data citations for a paper.
Potentially.
Yeah, well then the publishers decide, oh yes, that's what we'll do with data from now on. We're not going to give them their own references. We're just going to stick them in these. And then data becomes a second-class citizen again. Or not that it ever left that status.
Okay, I like what you're saying, because I envision that as well. That if we did such a great job to have a package for all the digital objects that went into the research, that we might actually be the preference for journals to gather it all together into this one location. So I think what you're saying is how, let's say we're that successful, how do we make sure we don't become a second-class citizen? So I would then go, one of the requirements is, if you've ever cited a chapter in a book, that's what we're going to be asking the journals to do. For in-text citation to the data element, to the digital object element within the complex citation object, you still have to cite out within the data availability statement is still there. You still have to document what the data was. And for all of the cited data or software or whatever, at least for the broad recommendations that's out there that we have implemented at AGU, you have to have an in-text citation to that data set, which doesn't make it a second-class citizen. It's a primary item. And this is, it's a primary item because it then gets a direct linkage from event data and from the indexers.
Maybe I can also comment.
But
so
not in the
we
reference
see really the risk that if the implementation is not there, that the credit might not end up at the linked object providers. So we really have to make sure that this is just the envelope, but the credit and everything what is related to it is really assigned to those who provide the linked digital objects, and that they should stay in domain repositories and well curated. So it's a risk, and we are aware of it, that we want to avoid that data becomes a second-class citizen again.
And Bob's making a really important point, that we're so used to looking at the reference section of a paper, and that's meaningful to see your data sets there. And if we tuck it into an umbrella, the complex citation object, what does that look like to other researchers? And we actually did not talk about that. So that would be important as a social construct to make sure that we cover that. Yep, I see at least one person nodding.
It would be really nice if the publisher could also unpack that object in the digital version.
And show it, yeah.
And show it, so just click on it and show which are the references. It should be possible because, well,
it could be done.
There's no magic behind it.
It could be done. Let me check our, we have 4 minutes. Okay, come over.
Hi, so Sveinung Gundersen again from Elixir. So another question, because this is clearly aimed at data that is citable, that's already published in a way that you can give credit to, but what about data that's in the database, or you can reference it in other ways, but not really part of that infrastructure yet? I mean, how did that work? Is that a solution for that? It's just for published data? I'm probably not using the correct words there, but yeah.
So I think what you're saying is there are different ways that data is rendered. Back in the day, data was in the supplement of a paper, and that's where I've decided. Oh, you don't agree with me? One thing, but are you asking me that if you're in the middle of curation and it's not published yet, how do I deal with that? I mean, that's a today problem. That's the same.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm a bit unsure what's the state of the art when you cite data. But basically, I mean, typically you would, at least in my domain, you would submit data to some sort of repository, domain repository, and get some identifiers and all of that. But I don't know if that data is automatically sort of citable in a way that you can get credit for it or not. And I guess that step there that might be lacking, and what about data that's sort of not at that level?
So when we talk about attribution credit, when we talk about attribution such that it's machine actionable, what should happen is the author, the creator of the data, puts that data into a repository that has likely a relationship with DOI, or a data site, to get a DOI and a citation. If you don't have, that's true. There are repositories that are not, they don't issue a citation, or they're using an ARC or handles from other. Well, I know a DOI is a handle, but they're not using a DOI. The publishing space hasn't yet expanded to link the two together. You can cite it in the references, you can cite an ARC in the references, but nothing will really happen. It should. That should be something that we all come together, RDA, and say to the infrastructure community, please figure this out, because it's a legitimate persistent identifier, and we would like you to have the services to support it. But you could also talk about a URL. You could say there was back in the day, I had a PI, really well-known PI, planets community. He was doing all of this research on one of the planets within our solar system. He had all kinds of data associated with that. He put it all out on his own website. No DOIs, no repository infrastructure, beautiful metadata, and everything that linked was a URL, and there was no persistence as we think of persistence within our community. And I have to tell him, this is beautiful and lovely, but this is not a repository. So but that he would cite it from there. That would be an example of citing a URL.
So will you support that? I mean, if the infrastructure is not there, there's a value of adding links to that still, and perhaps later you can sort of get all of that into the data site and those infrastructures, right? Yeah.
I mean, this particular project, that's a fundamental problem we're not trying to solve. others, we need help from others to make sure the data gets to repositories in order for this to work. But that's happening, yeah.
We have to wrap up.
Oh, wrap up.
I think it would
She
be
said
good to
rip up.
continue the discussion, so we would love to hear from you. Join the group. And yeah, and everyone download the draft recommendations and get
Thank
some
you.
comments to us.
Thank you so much, everybody. I'm glad you were all here. These are excellent conversation. I appreciate all your comments. I think there's
Yeah.
definitely updates we'll make to the recommendation before we send it out.
Yeah.
So you're,
Make recommendations also to the draft so that we can improve it before we hand it in to the RDA.
yep. So join the working group. I'll send out an email later today. You'll get a link to everything in case you didn't bother to figure it out so far, which is okay because we're all tired a little bit maybe. And then we'll give you an opportunity to feedback in that venue as well, including this one. Yep, thank you. Thank you, Martina. Thank you, Graham. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, translator.